Hi there, my name is Memo. This is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion, which you might be able to see around me. It's tropical houseplants. So today I wanted to continue on with the plant review series, and today the plant that I'm going to be reviewing, and let me bring this up, is the Philodendron Billietiae, or Billietiae, but let's go into the name a bit further down. But what I wanted to say is maybe some ground rules, but the lay of the land when it comes to these plant reviews. And I always say this, these reviews are massively biased to my opinions because that's the only one that I've got for this. It's kind of based on my plants in my care, in my environment. I'm based in the UK, and that means cold and wet for a large chunk of the year, and a bit dark as well because rain and grey, and apologies if you can hear any rain that's happening. It's been raining all morning, and I'm pretty sure this is here to stay for the day. Kind of excited about it though, because it means I'm going to have some water collected in the water butt in my allotment. Yay! Sorry, random segue. But with this plant, and with all the plants that I do the review, it's based on kind of my experiences. So a bit of background, I have moved 3 times in the last 3 years. I've not always been in a conservatory. Currently in the conservatory, I'm looking at the humidity level, and we're fluctuating between 70 and 80%. So, and that's not having a humidifier in here. This might pain a few people. Instead of running a humidifier in the conservatory, I run a dehumidifier to help bring down the humidity a bit, because in the summer we can hit the 90% in here and it's a bit much. It also means that I'm constantly cleaning windows and frames and all of these things so I don't get anything like mold. And yes, for those that have been asking, there is going to be a quick conservatory tour rather than just a shelf tour coming up soon. But when it comes to these reviews, obviously they are very relevant to me, my experiences, and also the time when this is posted. What I think will probably happen in a while when people stumble upon these videos in a few months or years' time, some things like availability or kind of scarcity of these plants might not be the case anymore, and it also might not be the case even now in your geographic location. But generally what will get discussed in these reviews is some background on the plant. I'll talk about my experiences in terms of speed of growth, ease of propagation, availability as I've mentioned, pests, and then at the very end I'll wrap up with some of my final thoughts on the plant and a score. And as with any of these reviews, I do encourage you, if you've got this plant and you want to drop a review down below, I don't think there's a lot of other people that are doing videos like this. Do drop them down below and think how you might write a product review on Amazon. And what I'm hoping is that these videos will become a bit of a place where people can come to and not only watch the video, but look at the comments and look at some other people's experiences and reviews of this plant before they purchase it, just so they've got a bit more of an informed decision going into it. Because what I will do for most of these is the good, the bad, and the ugly, essentially. So I will kind of, warts and all, I will tell you the kind of my true thoughts about this plant. But yeah, let's move on to the background. So as I mentioned earlier on, and I'll see if I can bring this in a bit more so you can see it, it's really odd, and that's one thing that you will see with a lot of my plants. All the leaves are pointing up instead of down, which you might get sometimes. And a lot of people were asking, how do you get them to kind of come down again? The one thing that I think a lot of people don't always realize is that the leaves will move towards where the sun is. And because I've got it in my conservatory and it's got top-down light coming in from the windows and the ceiling, essentially, the leaves naturally will move up towards the light. If I had this in a house where there's no light coming from above necessarily, but it's coming from a window, you might then see the leaves dropping down to look out towards the window, which kind of makes sense. They're moving towards where the light needs to be. So this is great for the plant, doesn't cause it any harm. I know decorative-wise and kind of aesthetic-wise it might not be for everybody, and it's kind of really difficult for me to show you, but yeah, it's a very, very cool plant. In terms of the name, because the name was contested for a while, or at least there was some debate about it, because everybody was, and it's the same thing with most botanical names as well, like try it, try your best. Nobody's always 100% sure of how things need to be pronounced. If I'm not mistaken, there's still a lot of debate about some of the Latin names in terms of, in other Latin words as well, in terms of how things might be pronounced. I might be wrong, but give it a go. But this one's an interesting one because Billietiae, or Billietiae, which is the correct way of pronouncing it if I'm not mistaken, was named after a scientist that is still alive. So I think maybe it was a year or two ago now actually, they were able to get this lady scientist whose name it was, and they asked, and she said, no, it's Billietiae. Billietiae instead of Billietiae. Billietiae, which is her name, which is cool. So instead of Billietiae, but I mean, people still call it whatever, and I think she was relatively relaxed about people will call it what they want to call it, it's fine. But yeah, the thing that you might be aware of or not be aware of from this plant, and it's not necessarily coming out as clearly as I'd like it to, is that the petioles of this plant are usually come in bright orange. More so I find in the summer when it's a bit brighter. At the moment you might be able to see some of the older stems, or sorry, not stems, petioles go towards a greeny colour, and that's fine. I've got a brand new leaf coming in there, and it seems like it might be a chunker finally, because when I first got it, you can see one of the tiniest, earliest leaves with some of the ripples on there, and it slowly grew. I had very low light levels, and you can see the leaves are getting longer but narrower. I did also have, I think, a bit of root rot on this plant. It took a while to grow, and that is actually something generally about this plant. It's not the fastest of growing, at least it hasn't been for me, but the leaves are definitely worth it. The petioles, the leaves, but yeah, this was a plant that a lot of people, and I think still is a plant that a lot of people want to get. I know I've had a lot of people that were asking for a review on the Billietiae or even the Atababoense. Wow, that's a bit of a tongue twister. Never had to say it out loud before. The Atababoense. That one I do not have in my collection, but I do have the Billietiae, and I think from what I've heard from other people, they are quite similar in their care and their growth habits, everything else. I think the Atababoense maybe slightly longer leaves, thinner leaves, and they also have a red back. This is definitely a Billietiae because it's got green back. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about background. Let's move on to speed of growth. So the growth speed for this one, as I kind of alluded just a moment ago, is a bit on the slow side. It's definitely, I'm trying to think, it's definitely not the slowest growing philodendron that I've got, but it's definitely not the fastest growing philodendron I have by a long shot. I will caveat that slightly and say that I got this plant quite immature. So again, let me bring in one of those original leaves. I can't believe that that original leaf is still there. It's one of the last ones that have been there still, and I think you can see that it's finally going. But yeah, it took its time, and I don't know whether or not it's a plant issue specifically to this plant or the conditions that it was growing in, because I'd heard that you needed to give it medium light, so I gave it medium light. It wasn't growing particularly happy. Then I was saying somewhere that it was just like, you need to give it brighter light than you would assume, so I gave it brighter light, and that didn't do too much either. I was pretty sure that I'd potted it in the right amount of soil, because obviously always try to pot plants into a growing media that's relevant to their root size, not the plant size, which can make it a bit tricky with soil sometimes. If you've got them in plastic pots and soil, they can get a bit top heavy. This is currently growing in, you should be able to see it. Yeah, it's growing in pon. And the interesting thing that has happened in terms of speed of growth is since putting it in pon, it finally stopped being so unhappy with its growing media. It's not in self-watering pon, it's still in pon where I flush and use it as usual kind of substrate. So my question out there, and hopefully somebody who has got this plant in soil in a chunky aerial arrowed soil mix, I'm curious, when you have this, because I had it in my chunky arrowed soil mix, which I would use for everything but my anthurium. My anthurium, I add even more aeration into it, almost as airy as you might get for some orchids, potentially. I'm curious with this one, is anybody growing it in that condition, and has it grown faster for you? And I know that there's a lot of people that will get much more mature versions of this plant, even more mature than some of these most recent leaves that I've got, because if I look at the size of this leaf, it's not huge at the moment, and I'm okay with it. I was hoping that by now, this long after I got it, it would be much bigger. Granted, at the moment, I don't have an awful lot of space, so I'm okay with it being a bit smaller for now. But yeah, I'd be interested to see what your experiences are in terms of speed of growth there. But as I said, I got it very, very young, and it might be part of the reason as well. It's exceptionally tight in terms of the internodal space, but we'll look at that when we look at propagation in a minute. So let's move on to propagation then, shall we? This is one that I have not attempted to propagate yet, and I know that some people do, but I want to show you why I've not attempted to propagate yet. And I don't know how well this is going to come up on camera, but you might be able to see just how tight that internodal space is between the nodes, essentially, to make that cut. I know from plants, pots, and whatnots, and she was kind of saying, I think she was trying to chop and prop her variegated Billietiae, which I definitely don't have in my collection. I don't have that kind of money laying around, especially to how expensive it is now. I also don't know if I would personally get that plant, because I know that it can be exceptionally temperamental about losing its variegation. I think it's highly unstable variegation. So, but she was able to get it back. But she was showing about cutting it and propagating and just the narrowness of those internodal spaces, so you don't end up destroying a larger chunk of the plant than you want to, basically. And it was nerve-wracking. I don't think, from what I've heard from other people, that it's particularly difficult to propagate after that point. No more difficult than any other philodendron, potentially. But yeah, this is one that, as I said, and I don't think I'm the only one that maybe hasn't attempted to propagate this just yet. Also with this one, part of the reason why I haven't propagated this is because I kind of want the leaves to get a bit larger before I try propagating, because then I can at least get a cutting from a much more mature leaf and then grow it from there, and then let this thing grow out as well a bit more. But yeah, for now, I don't have an awful lot to tell you in terms of propagation for this, but the way that I would propagate this, and feel free to tell me how you've done it if you have done it, is I would do it within pon, like I've done most of my other plants. Probably I'd leave it in, if I can, into propagation box, just to keep that humidity level high. But you might be able to see it will quite happily grow nice, substantial aerial roots. So that is a positive with it, basically. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about propagation. Let's move on to the next topic. Availability for this beauty. So again, this is based on my experiences here in the UK and Europe, I would say as well. I got this plant, if I'm not mistaken, about 2 years ago, I'd say. There's a lot of these review videos that are 2-year-old plants, because I was heavily getting plants around that period as well. So they were all kind of maturing at the same speed-ish, kind of. But that's a bit subjective, that one. But with this one, even back then, and this was, I'm trying to think if it was, it must have been pre-pandemic, I think, just pre-pandemic, I would imagine. I got it as a relatively small plant, as you saw some of the older leaves. And even back then, it was on the high double digits, low treble digits for something that small. I haven't checked recently, but I don't think the prices for these have dropped too much. And again, it's a bit of that supply and demand here at the moment. There's a lot more people, I think, that are looking for the variegated version of this plant rather than the green version of this plant. And I know, at least back then when I was looking at this, the variegated version of this plant was high treble digits, possibly moving into quadruple digits for a large specimen, basically. Or maybe even a single leaf or two, basically. It was insane numbers. But yeah, I think based on my experience, at least from what I've seen in terms of them going a bit slower than the average philodendron, I can understand why there's a bit of a price tag, because it takes a while based on the difficulty of taking the cutting because of how tight the nodes are. That's probably another thing. And yeah, there's probably not an awful lot of people out there. It's not as in demand as maybe something like the Gloriosum might be currently. So that's probably what it is, I would say, in terms of kind of availability. There's some out there, there's not that many out there, and the ones that are out there are okay in price. They're not stupid levels like what you might be getting with the variegated version that I was talking about before. But yeah, I don't think the prices fluctuated that much. So in theory, if you wanted to get this in order to propagate it and sell it, is it going to lose a lot of its value? I don't think so, but you'll be waiting for a while based on how slow it can grow and obviously how tight those internodal spaces are. So up to you as to what you want to do with that one. But yeah, let's move on to the next topic. Aha, pests with this one. And this one is a philodendron that the only pest that I've had so far, and I'm trying to see if I can show you, it's not going to come up necessarily on the camera, but I'll see if I can take a picture and add it here. This is a plant that does get extrafloral nectaries on the petioles, and what that means basically is it's kind of calling in the cavalries. I've got another video about extrafloral nectaries and I'll add it up here and you can see all about that. But the main pests that I have seen on this plant, at least in my environment, have been spider mites. And it's interesting because the spider mites, can you see all the ruffles and the dips and in the leaves? That's where the spider mites will grow. And this is one that can get spider mites relatively easily, I think. And they can kind of grow exponentially quite quickly again because there's so many nooks and crannies that they can kind of create a bit of that netting and have loads of little baby spider mites in there. I will say that that was when I had it in soil. I don't think it's been as bad, if at all, since I've moved it into pond, because the moisture level in the substrate is a bit more kind of regulated. As a lot of people know and might be aware, the thing with spider mites can get aggravated even more with certain plants if the soil goes dry for too long, and that's why we get a lot of more spider mites in the winter than we do in the summer months, potentially. Moving on to final thoughts. So with this plant, I'll do the same thing that I do for most of these reviews. Knowing what I know now, if I came across this plant again, would I buy it? Probably. It's an interesting one with this one. Knowing what I know now, would I go out of my way to buy it? If I could get a more mature form, so bigger leaves straight off the bat, for something affordable, then yes, probably. If I was to get something small, like what I originally got, even for the price that I got it. Would I get it now? Maybe. If I wanted a plant that was going to be big and bushy and grow fast, no. This isn't one of those, basically, especially if it's from a small plant. And also, the growth habit that this has is, because you see a lot of the times that you get all the stems in the middle and the leaves are beautifully down. That obviously won't work for me because I've got top-down lighting. But those stems won't stay like that. You can see I've got my kind of Velcro plant tie, and that's kind of what I tie to kind of keep it a bit more upright, because otherwise this can be a bit of a cumbersome plant because it grows wide and it kind of eventually would create a nice rosette around. But yeah, I don't know is the honest answer with that one. Depends on what I was looking for, I would say. And that's very kind of specific, isn't it? But yeah, it depends on the situation. If I wanted something big and I could get something big, then great. If I wanted something big to grow it big from small and get this, and I had the patience maybe, but I don't have the patience to probably no. Clear as mud? Okay. So in terms of scoring this plant, however, I would give it a solid 7 or 8. I'd say probably leaning more towards a 7, mainly because of that kind of slowness. But again, that's my opinion on this, because I would like something that grows a bit faster. Yes, it can be a bit fussy, I found, in terms of its soil and in terms of the lighting. But other than that, it is a very beautiful plant. I mean, keep an eye out for spider mites and obviously treat them. Is it worth the money that it's going for what I paid for it? Yeah. For a lot more, like kind of high triple digits and quadruple, I don't know. Because I think even the bigger ones, they're still relatively slow to bring new leaves out, especially the variegated ones. So I don't know. But overall, a cool plant. A cool plant. I'm not disappointed that I've got it in my collection, if that makes sense. So yeah, very, very cool plant. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. As I always say with these review videos, do leave your own reviews if you've got them down below. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.